So, welcome everyone. We're going to do a class tonight on Parashat Toldot, the parashah of the week. And before we start, as usual, we're going to do the class for the Refuah Shlema of
Avraham
Avraham Ben Julie. And also for the Refuah Shlema of
Shimon Ben Jacqueline.
For everyone that wants to say Refuah Shlema, for any people that they know that are sick, feel free to say any names. If you don't know any of the names, you can always say Ben or Bat Sarah.
Anita, Bat Jacqueline.
Lili Ben Chana.
Ali Ben Chana.
Yaakov Kobi Ben Nofar Mashi.
And for all the Cholim of Am Yisrael, Elna Refan Alem, Elna Refan Alem, Elna Refan Alem. We're also going to do the class for the Ilu Neshama of all the people that have passed away in the last year, and for those that want to do the class on their Ilulot as well. So we can also give them an Aliyat Neshama.
Celle de Bernard.
Sylvie Sada Bat Rachel.
Chaim Ben Dina.
Chaim Ben Dina, Menashe Ben Sod, Rachel, Claire Bat Simcha. And for all the people that have passed away in the past year, may all their neshamot have aliyot, and may we achieve all the tikkunim that we need to bring the Mashiach. Amen. So, tonight I'm going to talk about a couple different things. I'm going to give a couple ideas. I'm not going to do so much like we did a few weeks ago on the month, because every time we have a new Rosh Chodesh that comes about, because we had yesterday Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and it's the month of Chanukah, the month of miracles. I like to share always as we get into new months a couple ideas really quickly so that people know the energy of the month and the things that are going on with the month, and then I'm going to jump into the parashah. But I'm not going to do as much as I did last time when we had the whole class with the month of Cheshvan, when we talked about Menashe and about flipping the Ma Cheshvan to Ram and all that type of stuff. So just a couple quick ideas on Kislev, and then we're going to get into the rest of the parashah. Kislev, shalom, shalom. Chazak u'baruch. Ashrecha. Ari, come, you could come closer if you want to grab a seat over here.
No.
Perfect, and there's also pizza if you want to come grab.
À côté de moi, je sais bien.
We want to see you.
Moshe, get him a glass of wine. So, Ari, we just started. Literally perfect timing. So, the month of Kislev is a very special month. Obviously, we know because it's the month that Chanukah falls into it. It's a month with, it's a lot of miracles that occur in this type of month. But specifically, there's a couple main things. So, we know that all the months are attached to Shvatim, right? One of the Shevets of Bnei Yisrael, because there's 12 months and there's 12 Shvatim. This is specifically the month of Binyamin. And the reason why it's actually connected, and it also is the month of Sagittarius, right? In Hebrew, it is actually connected with the word for bow and arrow, chetz v'keshet, right? So keshet is actually the name of the month in Hebrew, and is connected. Why? Because if you look at Sagittarius, its symbol is about someone pulling a bow, right? Also, according to the Kabbalah, it's a month that the Mabul stopped in this month. So at the end of the Mabul, Hashem specifically sent a rainbow, right, which is also the symbol of the month. So you'll see that the symbol happens across the thing. Now, in the months, it's also attached to different types of the body that we correct. In the books of the Kabbalah or the Sidurim, whenever you'll read in the Hallel or when you read in the Musaf, the different names of Hashem that permutate or permeate in the Kavanot that you have, it's a mix that allows for it to correct specifically, I believe, the left ear. And there's different parts of the body that are always corrected. But in terms of action, this is a month that corrects sleep. And the reason why it has to do with sleep, to bring them all kind of together, is because sleep is a concept of letting go. So when you get to a place of reaching a place where you have peace, you're able to go to sleep and then have dreams, and then you can have an awakening where your soul can get recharged. We know in the Gemara and we know in the Kabbalah that sleeping is by itself a 60th of death. It's a form of renewal. And so this month, just like a bow has the ability to be pulled back, it's stressed until the point of release, and then it's able to release. So too, this month has a lot of opportunity that when it accumulates all the buildup of all the bracha and everything, it can release a lot of bracha as well through sleep. The last thing I'll share with it, because I'm not going to do a whole class on Kislev, is that there's parallels when you look at a circular framework of almost like a pie, like if you looked at a pizza pie, for example, that because there's 12 months, there's always a shevet that's facing the other one and the opposite. And so the opposite of Kislev is the month of Sivan, right, which is close to the other half of the year. it's also associated with sleep because these are the longest days in the year where you sleep the most. Okay, so there's reasons behind all of it. There's a lot of stuff that we can discuss with Kriyat Shema Lamita. The process before you go to sleep, there's a whole concept of sleeping and the preparation to go to sleep. How do you prepare to allow for your body to receive the protection it needs and the soul to have that protection? So we can discuss that at the end of the class if people have some questions on it. It's a fascinating concept, but there's a lot of power behind sleep and awakening and bringing about miracles. So that's what's the concepts behind this. And Sivan, just to connect it back with that concept of Sivan, is that Sivan has to do with walking. It has to do with feet. So it's the exact opposite. So it's just as one is stationary, the other one is movement.
And what's the tribe for Sivan? Because Benjamin is facing this other tribe, right?
Yeah, I'm blinking on it. I have a chart of it in my room. I'll show it to you after if you want. I can look it up after and let you know which one it is. But that's pretty much on the month of Kislev. So now we're going to jump into the parashah. Just so that people could understand the energy of the month and that understand that this is a month that through proper bracha, through letting go, through releasing, through giving a little bit of faith before you go to bed. And that's why sometimes people toss and turn in their sleep because they can't go to bed because they have too many things on their mind. Understand that giving emunah back to Hashem and giving faith to Hashem in this month will allow you to be able to receive a lot of bracha. And it will give you that peace that you need that you achieve through sleep. It'll allow you to dream. Dreaming allows for a lot of future things to come through into fruition. People dream before they succeed with a lot of their accomplishments that they want. So there's a lot of beauty behind this month, and that's why specifically Chanukah falls out in this month. Yeah.
It refers to the ears this month?
The what?
This month refers to the ears?
Yes.
Because there's a beautiful thing in the Gemara on lesson 7.
Yeah.
It talks about emunah being related to the ears. Why? Because emunah is something that you look at but you cannot understand. Meaning you cannot rely on sight or understanding. So it's referring to the ears, meaning you hear it, not necessarily meaning that you internalize it.
Yeah.
So if it's referring to the ears, and this is the month of Nisim, to bring about those Nisim and the Geulah, which has to do with Chanukah, because we know Chanukah is one of the only Chagim that will stay until after Mashiach. Chanukah and Purim. These two things are dependent upon Emunah because Emunah relates to the ears in that sense, letting go, not understanding.
And the salvation of these two chagim came through immense emunah and bitachon in Hashem. If you look at the story of Chanukah with the Maccabim, and if you look at Purim with what happened with Mordechai, you'll see that it's immense emunah and then it's immense salvation at the other end. And because it came about through our emunah and through our ahava, then Hashem said in the time of the Mashiach, when we repair all the Torah and all the mitzvot that need to be done, all the other Torot and all the other chagim, we don't need to do them anymore, but then we're going to actually just do Chanukah and Purim. So it's partly connected to that. So to jump into the parasha of the week and to give you a little bit of an overview, we're going to discuss mostly the story that happens because this parasha has a lot of very beautiful stories. We're going to discuss mainly the interaction that happens in this parasha, the famous story of how Yaakov goes to steal the bracha from Esav and gets the bracha from Yitzchak. Okay? But I'll give you a quick background on the whole parasha as well. We're also going to discuss the Ketoret Asamim. We read it every single day, but it's also the incense that was brought in the temple. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about Gilgulim. So it's a little bit more of a Kabbalistic concept, but we'll share it because I think everyone might enjoy a little bit, some of the mystical stuff. So just a little bit of the background on the parasha, so that everyone understands where we're going. And then we're going to give a little bit of some detail into some deep mystical concepts. And then we're going to be able to re-understand exactly what happened in the parasha like we normally do. So what happened was the parasha begins with Rivka being pregnant. And Rivka is pregnant with obviously two neshamot inside of her. She has Esav and Yaakov. But at first, actually, Rashi says that she didn't know. So if you read the psukim, she didn't know because as she was walking, it says that the baby almost wanted to come out when she was going through places of idol worship, when people were doing avodah zarah. And then whenever she would get next to the Beit Midrash or whenever she would get next to places that were holy, she sensed that the baby would also want to come out. So she didn't know that there was two. Eventually, she went to the yeshiva of Shem and Ever. And Shem and Ever were obviously, they lived for a very long time, but they were students that eventually taught a lot of Torah and a lot of Kabbalah through exactly Avraham learned and a lot of people learned in the yeshiva. Eventually Yaakov and Esav learned in the yeshiva of Shem and Ever until the age of 13, and then Esav eventually went off the path. Now, when she went there, they said that you have two great nations that are going to come from inside you. We know obviously that Esav led to Rome, and we know that Yaakov led to the Jewish people. After they were eventually born, like we said, they eventually got a chance to be able to come into the world. Both of them had incredible capacity and incredible potential to be very special people. And that's what we're going to get into, actually, the fact that Esav, we don't really talk about it, but Esav actually had more potential than Yaakov. And a lot of people don't discuss it because we know that Esav ended up not doing tshuva, and Esav was a rasha. Tried to kill Yaakov in many of the parashot that we will see. But the beauty of it is that there's a tremendous amount of potential from both sides. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. After they grow up, it says that Esav, around the age of 16, when they were both 16 because they were twins, Avraham passed away. The simple commentaries essentially state, and I think Rashi says that he passed away because Avraham didn't want to see Esav go completely off the path at that point. So Avraham, through the chesed of Hashem, passed away to not see one of his grandchildren go completely into Avodah Zarah and Tumah. Now Esav, he did so many evil things that Esav, as it says that he was a man of the field, he gained a lot of strength from doing evil things. So on the day where he got the lentils from Yaakov, which is right before the story of how Yaakov goes and gets the bracha from Yitzchak instead of Esav, Yaakov makes a deal with Esav for the birthright. Okay? So what he ended up doing is Yaakov was preparing a plate of lentils, red lentils, because there's a halacha that says when a father is mourning, or when a person is mourning, he's not allowed to prepare his first meal, al pi shulchan aruch, according to the halacha. And you always prepare him lentils or an egg, and it's known as a mourner's dish. Why? Because they're round pieces. It shows you that life is a circle that never ends, really. It's a small circle so that it shows you a sense of humility in becoming small in front of Hashem. There's a lot of symbolism behind the lentils, and there's reasons why he had to do that. But Yaakov was preparing the dish for his father because he knew that his father couldn't prepare it. When Esav came home that day and saw the lentils, it says that he was so tired, and then Rashi says that he did 5 sins that day. The sins that he committed on that day, just to show you the level of Esav, that he was such a big sinner, that Esav on that day, he had killed Nimrod, so he had committed murder, and he slept with a woman that was married, and that was Nida, and that was also non-Jewish, that essentially didn't come from the tribes that he was permitted to be able to sleep with. The whole thing. He did every single avera that you could potentially do. And Esav was so weak from after taking so much energy that was drained from there, that Esav came back home, and he said to Yaakov, feed me the lentils and stuff like that. And there's a lot of mysticism behind the words that's used over there. There's a lot of background behind the story. And Yaakov said, I'll feed it to you if you give me your birthright. And essentially the short version is that he says, fine, just feed me the food. I'll give you the birthright. I'll give you the bechor. And then after that, you can do it, and you can give me the food and you can take the bechor. Eventually Yaakov is going to go see Yitzchak, and in the place of the bechor, and he's going to go take the bracha because of this. We'll leave it at that for right now. And then we're going to go into some of the details. Now, there's a lot of questions that come up from the basic reading of the Torah. And some of them are questions that I was asking myself when I was reading it. Some of them are basic questions that Pshat, the Rabbanim in the Torah and in the Tanakh ask, very simple questions. And also some of them is even questions that the Zohar asks, right? Even the books of the Kabbalah ask. So the most simple question that comes to mind first is in the story of Yitzchak. And I'll give you the basic background of the story of Yitzchak. And before I do that, just to explain to you some of the deep mysticism behind Esav. Esav, as the Bechor, inherited the garment of Adam Arishon, okay, which was passed down through generations. That garment was made, there's lots of different arguments on how the garment was made. Most agree that it was different types of skin, and it was skins of different types of animals. So the way that Esav became a professional archer and hunter is that he had every single animal type of skin on his body. And whenever he had the right machshavot and the right kavanot, he can think of the right skin, and wherever he wanted to shoot his arrow, it could kill whatever type of animal he wanted, and it would instantaneously die. So they used different types of practical Kabbalah at the time to be able to kill animals. And that's why Esav became a professional in killing animals and killing humans and killing... the sins were endless in terms of what Esav did. So that's part of the garments of Esav and the different things that Esav held. Now, in the story of Yitzchak, when Yitzchak gets old, it says that he wanted to prepare a blessing for Esav. And then eventually Rivka overheard because Esav told Yaakov to go prepare a meal for him that has multiple preparations and seasoning and stuff like that. And then after that, to bring it to him, and then he'll give him a blessing, and it'll be the blessing for the firstborn. And Rivka heard that, and she went to Yaakov quickly, and she said, quickly, go get me the animal that's requested. I'll do the preparation the way my husband loves it, and you go in and you go get the bracha. And she gave him the clothing of Esav that was fresh in the home at that day. And he goes in, and then Yitzchak says it smells like Gan Eden, but then he feels the skin of Esav. And there's a confusion. Are you Esav? But what are you doing here? You're Yaakov. He says, no, I'm Esav. Yaakov says, and then he ends up giving him the bracha. And then Esav comes in, and then Esav, it says he essentially cried such a deep cry when he realized that his bracha was taken from him. He shed 2 tears. The Mefarshim say that the 2 tears that he shed are the destruction of the 2 temples. Because of how much pain he had, that he was granted immediately within that machshava, that 2 temples would be destroyed in his name.
Wow.
So there's a lot of symbolism behind a lot of it, and a lot of things that happen because these are pillars of people that controlled the world. So the questions that I had and the Mefarshim have, and that I think are just very obvious from the story, is one, Yitzchak being such a big tzaddik. How does he not know who Yaakov is, how Esav is? We know that Yitzchak was blind, but we also know that he had Ruach HaKodesh. And we also know that he could see things, he could also see future generations. Yitzchak went to Gan Eden. Also, if you remember from the Parashat that we talked about in the class from last week, we talked about how Yitzchak actually passed away at the Akedah and then eventually came back down, and then Rivka was born, and then that's when they eventually got married many years after. And had children. So there's a lot of mysticism behind it. But the thing is, how could a person so holy and so elevated not know? And how could he confused? And then on top of that, why is he giving only a bracha to Esav? Does he not see that Esav is such a big rasha? How does he not see that Yaakov is a tzaddik that deserves the bracha and Esav doesn't deserve the bracha? So all these questions are very legitimate questions, and a lot of people ask them, even including even the books of the Kabbalah ask it. Rav Chaim Vital, the Zohar says it. And you know, there's also a lot of emphasis in this parasha about, there's a lot of emphasis in this parasha about the clothing that's being used. So there's the clothing that Esav had that we discussed, that he used to go hunting. And there's the clothing of Yaakov that he wears when he goes in to get the bracha from Yitzchak. So what's the deal with the whole thing? And it says specifically with the clothing of Yaakov that he goes in to go get, it's called bigdei chamudim, like cute clothing, like the clothing that are nice.
En français, ça donne quoi?
It's like nice clothing, charming clothing.
Chamoud, c'est quoi? Mignon, quoi.
Yeah, it's almost it's mignon, but it's interesting use of words. It's chamudot,
Ouais.
so I'll get into the explanation behind that in a little bit, right?
It's my middle name.
So now that we have, because you are a cutie.
Yeah, I drink to that.
L'chaim. So we have the questions and we have the basic understanding of the parashah, but a lot of it doesn't make sense. So in order to make it make sense, we need to take a step back and we need to go learn a little bit about something else for a second. So to go into understanding this, we have to understand the reason of why Hashem wanted to bring his kavod into the world. And part of the process and the reason why Hashem wanted to eventually bring his kavod into the world is to be able to do eventually a mishkan, to eventually build the Beit HaMikdash. And the reason for that is if you look at the parashah in Parashat Trumah, in Shmot Chaf Hei Pasuk Chet, it says, Ve'asu li mikdash ve'shachanti betocham. Right? That you make for me a mikdash, or make for me a holy place, essentially a dwelling place, and I will dwell amongst you. And we know that the Shekhinah of Hashem dwells in the Mishkan, in the Kodesh HaKodashim, in the holiness of the temple. That's why the temple was so holy, it's very special. Aside from the fact that it's a place where we brought korbanot, and that it's known that Jews used to go there to give their sacrifices and all that stuff, it was mamash that the Shekhinah of Hashem, Kabbalistically, the Shekhinah is the divine presence that is essentially the feminine aspect of Hashem. And we talked a little bit about this, but just to give a little bit of mysticism in Kabbalah to the class, if you look at the name of Hashem, we have the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. Each one of the combinations of the letters of the name of Hashem represent different aspects of the name of Hashem. Different formations, different values, different emanations, different ways that Hashem develops his energy. And the lowest one is the final Hey, which is feminine. The Vav is masculine, and the other Hey is feminine, and then the other one is masculine. And there's pairings. But the Hey is always separated because when we live in Galut and we don't have the Mashiach and we don't have the temple built, the Shekhinah is always, it's exiled. It's in Galut, essentially. So when we do mitzvot and when we do good things and when we try to do positive things in the world, we bring the Shekhinah back to its source to be able to pair itself with the Kudsha Birichu, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the masculine aspect of Hashem. Okay? That's a little bit of the mysticism, introduction into the Kabbalah of that. And the Shekhinah, the feminine aspect, dwells in the Mishkan. It's a place mamash where Hashem dwells. The aspect of Hashem's energy is there. That's why we have the stories of the Ananei Kavod, the cloud of Hashem that would cover them and protect them in the desert and stuff. It's the Shekhinah of Hashem that would go and travel with them and dwell with them. Okay? You guys can all eat and drink, by the way, while we're chatting and chill. And we'll have some time after to ask some questions on this stuff if there are questions. So, we know that Hashem got us to the place of being able to be holy, and holy enough to be able to have His Shekhinah in the world. Now, actually, before all of this, we were actually supposed to have the Kedusha of Hashem live within each and every one of us. But because we sinned so much and because we fell and we were not pure, we lost the ability to be able to have the Kedusha of Hashem dwell within us physically. Right? And you learn this from the Parashat Kedoshim in Sefer Vayikra, where it says, "Be kadosh because I am kadosh." Kedoshim tiyu ki ani kadosh, in that respect. And so because we were unable of being kadosh within ourselves, even though we attempt kedusha and we tried to be kadosh and we tried to emulate Hashem's kedusha, we failed in it in a lot of respects. So we had to find a place to bring Hashem's kedusha into the world, and we built it up from Mishkan. That's why we do the temple offerings there. Now, there's one very special offering that we do that brings all the pleasure of the world to Hashem. Okay? And the thing that brings the most simcha and the most pleasure to Hashem out of everything in the world is the ketoret. It's the ketoret. So the ketoret is the 10 spices plus the one bad smelling spice that we do. We read it every single day in the tefillah. The bad smelling spice is called the chelbana. The galbanum, I don't know how they translate it in English. And the truth is that all that we have to get to the point of is that when you go and you keep on going out throughout history to eventually get to the Beit HaMikdash, you eventually get into the Kodesh. And just to give you a little bit of information about the Ketoret was only done by the Kohen Gadol. Only the Kohen Gadol could do the Ketoret. If anyone else did the Ketoret, or if anyone else attempted the Ketoret, they would pass away on the spot. Okay? If not, they were chayav mita, technically. That's why we read that whenever we read the parts on the Ketoret, whenever we're doing the tefillah. The Ketoret is so special that it's known as a segula to cure a person's sickness. So if a person is ever sick, you can always tell them immediately to read the Ketoret. The Ketoret is known as it brings refuah to people. The Zohar says, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that if we knew the power of the Ketoret, he says we would engrave in gold each letter of the Ketoret, and we would make for itself a crown and we would put it on our head. He says if anyone understood the true value of the Ketoret. He says we don't actually understand it. He says that's why we try to read it the way that we do and read it quickly and people skip tefillot and stuff like that. In reality, the Ketoret is so powerful that some people would even argue and say that the whole point of the tefillah is to even do the Ketoret itself. Because if the Ketoret brings so much joy and simcha to Hashem, why are we even skipping the Ketoret whenever we do tefillot? You know? The Ketoret as well, just to elucidate some of the powers behind the Ketoret, there was a famous story around the 6-day war, when Israel went to war against the neighboring countries. And there was lots of miracles that happened during the 6-day war. A lot of people that fought at that time, or a lot of people that were alive at that time will tell you, of course, amazing stories. But one amazing thing that happened was that there was a point where they grabbed a plane and they rented a plane and they put Mekubalim on a plane. And the plane traveled above Israel for a few days. And the plane did this multiple times for multiple days over the time of the 6-day war. And the Mekubalim were reading the Ketoret. And after 6 days of reading the Ketoret, the 6-day war ended. So, to put Mekubalim already in the plane, aside from the other tefillot that they do, but to note the fact that they were always focusing and doing the Ketoret, specifically as one type of prayer, shows you the power of the Kabbalah behind how powerful the Ketoret is. Tonight we're going to explain how we can see the Ketoret in the story of Yaakov Avinu. Alright? This is before the time of the Beit HaMikdash, before everything. Alright? Now, one other thing to understand, one of the secrets behind the Ketoret, and now we're going to finally get into some of the final depth of this, and we're going to get back to the parashah with some of this understanding, is that if you look at a Gemara, there's one Gemara specifically, and I'm blanking on the name of the Gemara. I don't know if Moshe might know it, but we'll check it on in a second, where the Gemara is talking about a tzibur. It's talking about halachot in regards to when people pray. And it says that whenever people pray in different types of groups, if you look at the word tzibur, it has the letters tzadik, bet, and resh. And it says that when people pray, that we accept all types of people within the community to be able to pray. And the tzaddik represents the tzaddik. the bet is the benonim, and the resh is the reshaim. So it says a community is filled with people that are righteous, middle, normal people, and then also you have reshaim inside. It says together it makes a tzibur. And it says that tzibur is even better and is accepted even more in tefillah than if it was just one or just the other or just anything else. Why? Because Hashem loves the whole. And where do we learn this from? We learn it from the Ketoret. Why? Because the Ketoret, you take the 10 bad, the 10 good, and you find the one bad. And in the Ketoret, by the way, when they brought the Ketoret in the Beit HaMikdash, the Ketoret used to go up perfectly in a straight line. It would never waver. The sky would change colors, and it would turn into these beautiful hints of like purple and blue and all these crazy hues, almost like different crazy sunsets that you would see. And then it would spread out, and it would smell amazing throughout the whole land. Now, when you see all of that, you have a basic understanding a little bit behind understanding how we take a little bit of bad and we also put a little bit of good in it. And we have also the combination of multiple things. That's going to be part of being able to understand the stuff for the parashah. But there's a very good question that's brought up also, which is why, and I keep on bringing a lot of questions, but we'll get to answers in a second. The truth is that there's a really beautiful question behind, why do we have the chelbana that goes into the Beit HaMikdash? If it's the holiest place and the Shekhinah of Hashem dwells there, and it's all this holy energy that's over there, why are we bringing something that smells bad? And one of the midrashim that's brought down of why Hashem in the world brought down flowers and beautiful plants and trees was purely for one reason, to show us how beautiful the world is. That's why you'll see all the plants and all the flowers that exist in the world, they're all very, very beautiful always. All of them have very unique character, very unique colors and stuff like that, but very few exist that are black. It doesn't exist that they're black. The chalbana is black. And so there's something over here behind why we're allowed to bring something negative in there and why it smells bad and stuff like that. In fact, people quote that in the olden days, people used to take the chalbana almost as a practice and cut it open and leave it at the entrance of their house because it would remove all bad smelling things like flies and all the different types of insects and all the different types of bugs because it smelled so bad that people couldn't even, it would repel everything. It was almost like an insect repellent at the time. So now that we understand this a little bit, we're going to jump back into the parasha and we're going to look at the story with Yitzchak. So when Yitzchak calls Esav and he tells him, I want you to be able to go outside and make for me the shechita and then bring me back the meal and then I'm going to give you a bracha to make an exchange. Rivka hears what's happening and she tells Yaakov that I want you to go and I want you to do this. And then she gives him the clothing. And she gives him these clothing that are bigdei chamudim, that are very special clothing. And Yaakov enters and he's ready to go accept the bracha. And he shows up with the food and he has wine as well to give Yitzchak. There's a whole thing behind this. So I'm going to play for you now the scene, but with understanding the information that we have. When Yitzchak is sitting on his deathbed, he smells Gan Eden, and he knows it's Yaakov that walks in now. So it's not a question of if Yitzchak knew Yaakov or not. Now we know he knows it's Yaakov. Why? Because we know that when he passed away, he went up to Gan Eden for 3 years, and then he came back down. So he knows what Gan Eden smells like. You want to know what the Zohar says Gan Eden smells like? The Ketoret. So he knows now that he's smelling the incense of Hashem, of what makes Hashem happy. And he sees the tzaddik that walks in and he sees Yaakov. So he says, I see Yaakov and I feel Esav. And Esav represents the action of this world, all the potential. So when Yaakov comes in, he tells him, he says, what are you doing here, Yaakov? Because I'm going to repair Esav. I'm going to give a bracha to Esav, not because I forgot you, Yaakov, but because there's a tikkun that we need to repair Esav in the world, because we need to bring together the bad and the good. So I decided I'm going to take it upon myself to bless Esav to do it. But Rivka knew, when she called Yaakov, that because Yitzchak comes from the side of Gvura and the side of Din, that if Yitzchak, through his infinite form of Gvura, blessed Esav, which was not a perfect vessel to accept the bracha, because Esav had committed so much murder and so much crime and so much evil that it would have been endless, the reparation. We would have never been able to overcome it and he would have had too much strength. She knew that only Yaakov can repair it. So she put on him a garment, a bigdei chamudim. The mefarshim and the pasuk say what? It's the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. So now Yaakov comes and he sees Yitzchak and he says, you're not going to repair Esav, I'm going to repair Esav. He says, how? He says, because you think that you're one of the 10 tzaddikim since the beginning of time. Yitzchak thought that because he's part of the 10 tzaddikim and Esav is the chelbana, so he said, I'm going to do the ketoret in front of Hashem right now, and I'm going to repair Esav. But Yaakov said what? He said, no, I'm the Kohen Gadol, you could not do. So when he felt the clothing, he understood that Esav, that was supposed to be Bechor, and the Bechor is supposed to work in the Beit HaMikdash, he says, no, I'm going to let you do the Korban. And I'm going to let you do the Ketoret. And that's when Yitzchak realized all of this, and Yitzchak blessed Yaakov. Because he realized that Yaakov, who was the tzaddik, and in the Kabbalah, the tzaddik is the Kohen Gadol. When the Kohen Gadol doesn't live anymore, we have tzaddikim. Because the Kohen Gadol is supposed to be a parallel and a bridge between us and Hashem. The Kohen Gadol does the service of Yom Kippur, he takes on all the sins of Am Yisrael, he does everything to be able to bring us up to Hashem and accept all the tefillot. But the tzaddik does the exact same process. So the tzaddik is considered like a Kohen Gadol. So whenever Yaakov now, he began this process, you guys see the depth behind all the story that's happening over here, that it's not that Yitzchak, God forbid, forgot Yaakov, is that he wanted to do the tikkun of Esav, and he wanted to bring out the glory of Hashem and repair the world right then and there. But Yaakov said, you can't do it, I need to be the one to do it, because Yaakov falls into a perfect balance between Avraham and Yitzchak. And he said, I am the one that's carrying the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, so I'm going to do the Ketoret, and I'm going to find the good in Esav, and I'm going to bring him together to do it. But you need to give me the bracha, because I'm the only one that has a vessel to be able to do it. And that's when he blessed him. And by the way, we are still feeding off the bracha of Yitzchak Avinu to Yaakov, why we are alive today. Because if you look at the Jewish people throughout history, we are about 0.002% of the world. It's roughly 2 in every 1,000 people, you'll find a Jew. And we have 25-30% of the Nobel Peace Prizes, the amount of wealth and the amount of bracha and the state of Israel and the innovation and the bracha that we have comes from this bracha that Yitzchak gave us and from the Brit Ben Abetarim of Avraham Avinu. So all we have comes from our avot. Now, Yitzchak and Yaakov knew this. If we have a little bit of time after, I'll share with you a couple more secrets from the version of the Arizal on this. This is from Rebbe Nachman. So I'll share with you some of the stuff from the Arizal later if we have a little bit of time and we have some questions. We're about 80% of the way done with the class so that people understand where we're at. Yitzchak and Yaakov, they knew these corrections that existed in the world. They knew the tikkunim of the neshamot that they needed to bring down. Avraham knew it, Yaakov knew it, Yitzchak knew it, even Esav knew it. So Yaakov knew that he had to take the Bechor from Esav. So he began the process with the lentils, like we said. So what happened whenever Yaakov prepared the lentils? He told Esav, you have so much potential because you came out first, you're the Bechor. You, and we know that Esav was supposed to marry Leah, and Yaakov was supposed to marry Rachel. And we know that Leah comes from a higher place in the Kabbalah than Rachel came from, a higher part of the body of correction. And they were supposed to together bring down the Neshamot of Am Yisrael, because Yitzchak was the first person born out of the purity of Am Yisrael, which we discussed in the last class, because Avraham and Sarah were the first 2 people to be kasher in their marital relations, that they didn't have a child out of Nida, and Avraham had a brit, and everything was perfect in the Adorat Machshavot, so Yitzchak was born. And when Yitzchak had that Kedusha, he was supposed to bring into the world the perfection. But because Esav was not able to bring about that perfection, Yaakov had to take that Bechor, and Yaakov had to take the strength from Esav, otherwise Esav would have brought it all to the negative. So Yaakov had to go take that Bechorite instead of Esav. So when he tried to see if Esav can do tshuva and come back to Hashem, he told him, he said, you know that you're a Bechor. In the time of the Mashiach, after whenever we build the Beit HaMikdash or in the future temples, you're going to go and you're going to work as a Bechor in the temple. Because we know that Bechorim are supposed to work in the temple, in the service of Hashem. But Esav said, no, I don't want to work in the temple because that's in the future. I want to live now. So he said, feed me the lentils. Why? Because the lentils are little red circles which represent the Gvura. He says, it's enough for me to just take my bracha from my father. So Esav also knew a lot of the Kabbalah behind this. This is the depth of the conversation. It's not that he was saying, oh, I'm only a man of physicality. He was so drenched in the Tumah that he said, I'm just going to take the bracha of my dad and I'm going to be okay. But Yaakov said, there's the future generations that need your help. That you can do tshuva if you want to be about tshuva, which is higher than the level of the tzaddik, which was Yaakov. But Yaakov had to become Baal Tshuva because Esav went to the Tumah. So he traded him and he took the Bechor right in that moment. But Yaakov never finished the Tikkun. So now we get into the story of Gilgulim. Now we get into the concept of reincarnations. Fast forward to the 2nd century BCE in the Roman Empire. Okay? Doing a little bit of a movie here. So you had a very special tzaddik by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Okay? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was very well known as almost like the Moshe Rabbeinu of the time, because he compiled all of the oral Torah. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu got the written Torah, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote down all of the oral Torah. Okay? He wrote down all the Mishnayot and all the Torot, and then eventually after that we have all the arguments and the conversations that come about through the Gemara because of him. He was a very, very special person. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, by the way, learnt with... these are people that came down from the students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Akiva, so these are the holiest of the holy. And there's a very famous story about Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who was the father of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was born, the Romans made a decree that they were not allowed to do Brit Milah. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi didn't care, because of obviously these are people that were incredibly holy, and they know the concept of the Brit. We discussed a little bit of the secrets behind the Brit. So he said, there's no way that I'm not doing Brit Milah to my son. He did Brit Milah and he called everyone over. They came and they heard Brit Milah. Word spread to the Caesar, and they said, bring us Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and also bring us his child, and we're going to see if he did Brit Milah. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, with a lot of emunah and faith, started walking, and he said, okay, I'm going to bring my son and I'm going to go see the Caesar of Rome. And as he was walking, they were all very, very well-known holy people at the time. So even Romans knew these very special holy Jews, and they were friends with them. And he saw one of his good friends, and he told him, he said, look, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, I know you're going to go to the Caesar. He's going to see you're going to he's going to kill your son on the spot. He says, I just had a son. Let us switch the sons. You'll take my son. He doesn't have a brit. He's not going to kill you. He's going to see there's no brit milah. You come back and we'll trade back. He said, that's not a bad idea. Let's do that. He did that. Went to the king. Came back in peace. They switched children. You know who that child was that Rabbi Gamliel ben Yehuda brought in front of the king, brought in front of the Caesar? It was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, who was the emperor of Rome that eventually came up, the Caesar of Rome, the person that you know that we see movies on, Gladiator and stuff like that. That was the child that he brought in front of the king. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was the child that was born, and Marcus Aurelius Antoninus became very good friends. When Marcus Aurelius became the Caesar, he built underground pathways, it's written down in the Gemara, between the palace and the house of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, so that they could learn together, because they were so close. It's written down in the Gemara that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was such a holy man, and was such a special tzaddik at the time, that Marcus Aurelius used to sit down as the Caesar and bend over so that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi could walk on his back to get onto his bed. This would be chayav mita at the time, if anyone saw this, that a man walks on top of the back of the Caesar. They were so close together that at the end of their life, Marcus Aurelius asked him, before he abdicated from the throne, he told him that I want to, when he started getting to questions of Gilgulim and the future generations, because these were very special holy tzaddikim that lived at the time. And when he started answering him, he told him all the different concepts in the Torah and the thing. He said, I want to have a place to come in the feast of Hashem in the end of times. And he told him in an argument, because he knew the halacha, he said, I can only do it if I enter into the Brit of Hashem. So he said, make for me a Brit Milah. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi made a Brit Milah to him on the spot. And he did a correction in that moment. In the book of Chesed Lavram, who was Rebbi Avraham Azulay, which I discussed last week, if you guys remember, for those that were here, we talked about Rebbi Avraham Azulay, who was a massive Mekubal, the ancestor of the Chida, who was the one that went into the kever to remove the stone of gold with the diamonds, if you guys remember. That we said he went inside and he came out alive. Whenever the Turkish emperor asked him to be able to go down, and he went into Marat HaMechpelah, and he saw the Avot, and then he came back out and he passed away 7 days later. This is the same Rabbi Avraham. In his book, Chesed Lavram, he discusses this and he discusses Gilgulim. He says, understand that Yaakov Avinu came back in a Gilgul of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, in a reincarnation of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and Esav came back in a reincarnation in Antoninus, to have the tikkun, to do the completion. Why? He says, because if you take Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and you take the letters of Han Nasi, Hey, Nun, Samech, no,
Shin.
sorry.
Shin.
If you take Nasi, if you take Nun, Shin, Yud, Aleph, it's Nitzotz, shel Yaakov Avinu, which is a spark of the neshama of Yaakov Avinu. So because we knew that Yaakov Avinu longed in the parashah to do the reparation of Esav and didn't get to complete it because after he took the bracha, Esav wanted to kill him. And then there's the separation of the brothers. And then there's a lot of mysticism, which we'll get into the next weeks. If you guys want, you got to come back next week for a little more details on that. But the beauty of it is that because he wanted to do the rectification of Esav, it had to come back. Now, Rebbe Nachman says something really beautiful about this, and we're going to be wrapping up very soon here. Rebbe Nachman says, from this, we learn something very special. He says, if you think that whenever you long or whenever you care or you try to do something with good intention from the bottom of your heart to get close to someone or to do tshuva or to help bring someone closer, to do a mitzvah, understand that it never disappears. It may ripple into many generations after that. And he brings this as a source. He says, why? He says, because it's written the second you have a will, or you do a bracha, or you do a nidbodidut, or you do a tefillah, and you say, Hashem, help out this person, or help out that person, or help me, or help out this. You engrave into the Shekhinah, you engrave into the fabric of time, you engrave into your bones concepts and tshuva and energy into the world that will eventually come true. And so that's why we learn through this that a person needs to always understand that they should never lose faith no matter what they do. That every single thing that they're going to do is going to bring back a lot of tshuva in the future. So Rebbe Nachman asks a question. He says, after all of this, he says, where do we have the Ketoret today? He says, if you think that the Ketoret, we don't do it anymore, because we read the Ketoret, and it's as if you brought the Ketoret. But why does it bring so much happiness, and what's the reason for it? Like, what's the big deal behind the spices? He says, what's the whole thing with that, and how do we do it today, technically, because we don't have the Beit HaMikdash, we don't have the Kohen Gadol. He says, Azamra is the Ketoret. There's a lesson in Likutei Moharan, lesson 282, that he discusses in depth about the concept of Azamra, which is I will sing. I will sing with my little bit. Okay? Azamra le'elokai be'odi. I will sing to Hashem with my little bit. That little bit is the little bit of good that you find in yourself, that you find in another Jew, and you never judge anyone badly. So Rabbi Nachman is saying that when you have the capacity to be able to dig down and find the chelbana, the little bad, or something, because we all encompassed within bad, and you sing to Hashem and you find good, you bring the ketoret in front of Hashem. And that's what makes Hashem so happy. He says, you want to understand why? If you look at the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. Why? Because of Sinat Chinam. We talked about the time when the Romans destroyed the temple. When they destroyed the temple, because Jews at that time, they were mekubalim, they were so learned, they knew all of the Torah, they knew everything that there was. They can quote to you any type of passage and everything. They sat down and they learned all day. But what? They hated Jews for no reason. It doesn't make any sense. How can they be the holiest Jews, but they hate Jews and then they destroy the temple? He says over here that Jews that can be the simplest Jews that don't do any sort of mitzvot and any sort of thing, but they find a little bit of good in people, and they do azamra, it is as if they bring the ketoret. It's an incredibly powerful point. And it's higher than the people that lived at the time that would destroy the temple because they hated people for no reason. So whenever you ask yourself, there's one last concept I'm going to bring, and then I want to share with you guys a story to show you the power of the ketoret and all the story of the parashah. Rebbe Nachman is actually saying over here, he's saying something very special. He's saying, we don't have the Kohen Gadol, but we have the tzaddik. So he says, when you attach yourself to a tzaddik, in reality, you do a lot of sins. You do a lot of things that are bad. So when you do things that are bad, it smells bad. It's negative energy. It's the same thing as whenever we do good things, we release amazing aromas. That's why sometimes people, when they walk into rooms, they've done tons of mitzvot, they shine a lot. They bring a lot of light, or they bring a lot of energy. They can bring a lot of bracha into a room. Person has a lot of anger, a lot of fighting, they bring a lot of negative energy into a room. And sometimes it's odors, sometimes it's scent, sometimes it's light, sometimes it's energy. So Rebbe Nachman says, when you attach yourself to a tzaddik, the tzaddik is only good. So when you bring a little bit of your bad and you do vidui, and you say, I'm attaching myself to a tzaddik, and you allow for the tzaddik to be able to help you and elevate you, he brings the ketoret. And doing that, he does it by azamra. How? By you finding a good point. So when you attach yourself to a tzaddik and you say, I'm finding a good point with myself, I'm bringing the ketoret. And I'm saying, even though I did this bad and this bad and this bad, you're showing Hashem, I have the chalbana. I'm bringing a mikdash within myself, and I'm trying to find you within the world. And you're saying, I understand that I spoke a little bit bad today, or I stole this, or I spoke bad, or I did this wrong, or I did that wrong. But here's the good. You attach yourself to the tzaddik, and you talk about all the good things that you did. You say, but you know what? I did put on my tefillin today. And then I did say thank you, and I sent a text. And I did this, and I did that. And all those things together, they bring the Ketoret, they bring Hashem to the highest level. That's why Hashem loves the Ketoret. That's why he smelled Gan Eden, Yitzchak. And that's why whenever Hashem says it, it brings him the most joy in the world. Why? Because in the Gemara it says that Tzibur, Hashem brings the most joy when he sees the highest people loving the lowest people. Because that is the combination that he wants. And what happened with the Ketoret in the Beit HaMikdash? It smelled good. It smelled amazing. Because no matter what, even when you add a little bit of bad, it still turns out okay. It still turned out perfect. It's even better than before. So there's a beautiful story of the Baal Shem Tov that I want to share just because of connection to the story, and then I'll end with this. The Baal Shem Tov was a very, very special soul. He was the great-grandfather of Rebbe Nachman. And at the time that he lived, the Baal Shem Tov was very well known for doing a lot of Kabbalah Ma'asit. Essentially, he could do a lot of practical Kabbalah. He did a lot of things. There's famous stories about how he used to travel with his horse and travel long distances of time in times that people could not imagine. So, the Baal Shem Tov was actually learning with, I'm blanking on the name. Achia Shiloni, right? Yeah, Achia Shiloni, who lived in the time, around the time of David HaMelech, and he was a famous prophet. The Baal Shem Tov used to be able to learn with him. Now, the Baal Shem Tov used to learn different kavanot from him and different meditations to be able to go up and do Aliyat Neshama. And when you do Aliyat Neshama, when your Neshama is sent into higher levels and spheres in the Kabbalah, you're able to learn different things. You see different worlds. You're able to see different creatures, different animals, different angels, different things like that. So, as he went up one day, he was talking to Achia Shiloni, and he told him, he said, please bring me to the place, because the Baal Shem Tov was dwelling a lot on a concept that he was learning, where he wanted to know the reward and understanding how to do the best of every single mitzvah. So before Shabbat, when he did Aliyat Neshama, on Shabbat, he told Achia Shiloni, when he went up, he said, bring me to the place for the person that does the best Shabbat in the world. So Achia Shiloni said, okay. And he started bringing him up to very high elevated spheres and high elevated places until he reached a place that was so high that angels couldn't even attain. And he saw that there was 2 thrones made of gold and very large thrones and stuff, and one next to another. And he said, whose thrones are these? He said, one is yours if you're worthy, and the other one is of another person, but you have to find him. So he said, okay. He went down, and after Shabbat, after he did Havdalah, he got onto his horse and he traveled. And he did this thing where he read Kavanot, which Achia Shiloni taught him, and he could read the different types of permutations of the names of Hashem, and the distances that he would travel would go into short fractions of time. That's why there's concepts like this, because when the Jews traveled in the desert, it said that they traveled 3 days in the time of 1 day, or in terms of 1 hour or something like that, because they understood this Kabbalah. And Hashem essentially shrinks the space of time in earth so that they can travel. So he came down, he did the kavanot, the horse, he lets go of the reins and he just let the horse go. It's very well known that he would never direct the horses would just go. And the horses would take him exactly where he needs to go. So he arrived after many days of traveling, even though shortening the distance, he eventually arrived towards the middle or end of the week at a house in a very secular town where there was no Jews. And he's like, okay, this is very bizarre. He gets off the horse and he enters into the house. And he says, can I please stay over here for Shabbat? And he didn't reveal anything about why he's coming or anything like that. And he sees that Mamash, this guy is a very secular man. He has no understanding why he showed up at this person's house. He's saying, how is it possible that this person has one of the highest places, the highest place of keeping Shabbat? So he says, okay, let me stay with you during the week. He sees zero Kedusha, zero kashrut, zero tefillah, zero anything. He doesn't understand anything at all. He says, okay, but let me see what happens during Shabbat. He says, can I stay with you during Shabbat? The Baal Shem Tov says it was the most miserable Shabbat of his life. There was no Torah, there was no tefillah, there was no anything, there was no food because he didn't have any kosher food. He had some leftover bread from his travel. So he couldn't even really properly do the Simcha of Shabbat. And at the very end of Shabbat, at the time of Seudat Shlishit, all the neighbors came by and they were playing music already. Now, if you're thinking the Baal Shem Tov, one of the biggest Mekubalim to ever exist, is standing in a random city. A guy's accepting him with all the love in the world at his house, but the guy's playing music on Shabbat, breaking Shabbat. At this point, he's just like, that's it. I mean, what do you want from Hashem? I understand absolutely nothing. So, at the very end of Shabbat, after seeing the Seudah and everything, the Baal Shem Tov is packing his bag and ready to leave, and he asks the man, he tells him, could you just explain to me one thing? What was the deal with that party that you had at the end of Shabbat? And he tells him, I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anyone. He says, I was born Jewish, but I was taken away when I was younger, and I was brought to a secular family, a non-Jewish family, and I don't remember anything of my childhood except for on Shabbat, my parents used to do a very big party. When he was very young, he didn't know if there was musical instruments allowed, al pi halacha or not, or any food or anything like that. They would do a very big seudah shlishit. So he said, the only thing I remember of my childhood and my Jewishness is that my parents used to celebrate this, so I take all the money that I have from the week and I do everything I can to have the best party at the end of Shabbat. Every single week, and I invite all of my friends and everyone, and I do it with absolute joy in all of my heart. And he told that to Baal Shem Tov. And then the Baal Shem Tov understood, he said, this is why he gained the highest place in Olam Haba. And then when the Baal Shem Tov wanted to tell him all of the secrets and everything that he knew, he felt his lips being pressed together. And he said that he understood in Shamayim, because tzaddikim, they're vehicles for Hashem. We'll do a class maybe on this another time, but the level whenever you become kadosh and when you become very holy is that you become a vehicle for Hashem to operate through you. So tzaddikim, they know that everything that they do, every moment, every interaction, every word is all chosen by Hashem. So when he knew that he couldn't speak and explain to him anything, he said, I knew that if I told him, he would never be able to do Shabbat properly. He would never do Shabbat on the level of the way that people do when they follow halachot of Shabbat, and he'll never bring joy to Hashem the way he does. So they don't want me to, so that they will enjoy his joy in heaven forever, the way that he does it. So he kept his mouth shut. He went home, and then he did Shabbat again. And then he went up and he asked Achia again. He said, could you take me to the place for the person that does the worst Shabbat? And then they went to one of the deepest pits in Gehenna. And he saw something that was made, the way he explains it, is that it was chairs made of complete coal that were smoking. They were black chairs. And there were 2 chairs, and he said, whose chairs are these? He said, this can be your chair if you're not worthy. And he said, it's a chair of another person that you have to go find. So after Shabbat, after Havdalah, he did the exact same thing. And he took his horse and he went. And this time he arrived in a very religious city, where there was a lot of chachamim and a lot of rabbanim. And he eventually ended up at the front door of the head rabbi of the city.
Silva will love this story.
Oh yeah. And then he was also very confused again. But then when he walked in the door, he started to understand a little bit. He said, can I stay for Shabbat? The man didn't accept him for the first 35 minutes or 40 minutes because he was learning, so he didn't want to accept his guests. And the Baal Shem Tov thought to himself, when Avraham Avinu, which we learned in last week's parashah, Avraham Avinu was sitting at the entrance of the tent of the Ol Moed, and he was when he was sitting at the entrance of his tent, and Hashem was speaking to him, he told Hashem, wait, there's guests. So if Avraham can leave Hashem to accept guests, he said, who are you to not leave for another person that's walking through a city? He didn't say this, but he thought it. So he already knew that the people they thought with their chokhmah, that they're already better than the people of the concepts of the Torah, of the Avot. Here's the introduction. Then after that, he tells him, I want to stay for Shabbat. And then he saw that the Rav didn't move an inch during Shabbat because he was too scared that if he removed the hair of his beard, he might be doing one of the halachot, the melachot of Shabbat, and that he got angry at the children when the children were speaking because they were scared that they were annoying or they're not bringing kedusha to the room. And everything was so machmir that he would not even walk outside because he was scared he might step on an ant and kill an ant. And they brought so much devastation and so much darkness to the Shabbat. He said, I understand why he has a dark place down there. And then when the Baal Shem Tov wanted to be able to explain it to him, and he wanted to open up his mouth was sealed again. And he said, why? He said, because he understood that a person like this is so entrenched in their own chokhmah, in their way of viewing the world. He says, sometimes there's a halacha that said that if a person is not going to listen to you, you're not allowed to tell him what to do. Even if he's doing something wrong. You're not allowed to tell him to do something right. And the Baal Shem Tov left. And from there we learn a very special story to connect it back through all the parashot. We learn a special story over here that mitzvot like the Shabbat, like doing any type of mitzvah in the world, it's about setting a ripple effect that's going to play into the world for the future. Everything that you're supposed to do, like the tzaddik says over here, like we learn from the interpretation, the story of Rebbe Nachman on this parashah, is to find that even though there's bad that exists in the world, and even though there's the chalbana, Hashem loves it and He accepts the chalbana into the Kodesh HaKodashim that the Kohen Gadol brings it, because, not the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Kodesh, because it was brought on the Mizbeach in the Kodesh, and He accepts it, and He loves it, and it brings the most joy because it's about finding in that bad, you find all the good. And you do the Azam Rav Rebbe Nachman, and you say that in that bad, I'm going to find good, and I'm going to work on myself, and I'm going to get close to Hashem. And from that, we see that the Baal Shem Tov from this point understood that being happy and doing all the mitzvot with as much love as you can and as much heart as you can is the only way to attain the highest places in the world to come. So Be'ezrat Hashem, through all of this learning and through all of these Torot, and through the parashot that we learn over here, may we have the strength to be able to connect with Hashem and do all the mitzvot with simcha, to ask Hashem for more mitzvot and more mitzvot and more mitzvot to be able to connect and to be able to bring the Mashiach. So I did it that way so that we can, if there's some questions and stuff on the parashah, we're kind of, just under an hour. But if people have some question on the parashah, if not, if people would like, there's more things to share. Obviously, there's wonderful arizal on the parashah as well with the same story that happened.
Yeah, someone.
Moshe, can you open up the door?
And the last thing that you said, that these leaves were sealed, because sometimes there's an halacha that you cannot